I'm Doug Wiley with Police Magazine. I'm here with my good friend Missy Lynn. We began a discussion about the constitutional law crate, and there's so much in the crate that we really need to get back into it.
As I talked about, the outside of the crate, on the lid of the crate is totality of the circumstances, as in the overall concept, right? And when you open up the crate, under the lid, I created a space for departments to put their options chart if they have one, or their continuum if they're still using one. I actually have one if they would like to use it, and it breaks down the force into the 3 levels that we commonly use in the Ninth Circuit, and other circuits use that as well. But you must make sure that you're familiar with your law in your area. That's why under the lid it says the what and when of force, right? So you can put your own options chart there. Inside the panels of the crate are the 8 officer subject factors, the 3 levels of force, the 5 gram factors, and the 5 circumstances when you can use force. Those are equivalent to the actual equation. So the equation is the force fraction, objectively reasonable under the totality of circumstances, equals 835 squared. Now, that worked out really well in the state of California because 835A of the Penal Code is actually the statute that deals with when officers can use force and under what circumstances officers can use force. And that's actually one of the 5s. There's no math involved, by the way. One of the 5s is the 5 circumstances when you can use force as a peace officer, right? Which is effect and arrest, overcome resistance, prevent escape, defense of self, and defense of others. That's really simple. So when you know there's 5 parts to that answer, it's easier for an officer to recall. In addition, the second 5 in the 835 squared is the gram factors, right? So the most significant factor in deciding whether an officer's force was, 8 magic words, the only tattoo you can use, objectively reasonable under the totality of the circumstances, is the immediate threat to the officer's safety or the safety of others.
Right.
So the first component of the gram factors is the immediate threat to the officer's safety or the safety of others. The second component is active resistance. Is the individual actively resisting you? The third component is, as I like to phrase it, split-second decision making. The time available for the officer to make a decision, which we all know is critical. The next part is the crime or crimes that have been committed, are being committed, or about to be committed that the officer is aware of. And then the 5th part is whether the individual is trying to evade or escape. Now, that's your 2 5s. The 8 officer subject factors. My officers are like, Missy, how do I remember 8 things? Oh my God. And I have ways for them to remember the gram factors in particular, for example. But, the point is that officers need to know those.
Yeah.
When you write a report, you give a statement, you testify, right? You should know those. If you didn't, you memorized them in the academy and then you forgot them, right? Well, you still had to know them. And when you tell your side of the story, you better understand that explaining the immediate threat to your safety or the safety of others is a primary focus of the evaluation of your use of force, right? So we took those 8 officer subject factors. I was working with some officers from Gardena, as a matter of fact, and on a use of force case. And they said, how are we going to remember this? I said, go home, come back tomorrow, and tell me a story. So together we came up with the way they memorized this. I knew this one old SWAT guy. He was beat up crazy, used to stand in the ring with his gun. What did she just say? Right? I knew. Prior contacts.
Okay.
You've been to this house before?
Yeah.
It's a problem location.
Right.
Or this bar, right? Or you've dealt with this guy before. He put 3 officers in the hospital, right? I knew this one, number of officers versus number of suspects, right? It's a factor. Old, age, size, gender, relative strength. Look, if Officer Godzilla is dealing with Minnie Mouse, right? Badass little Minnie Mouse, is there a difference in, what's reasonable for Officer Godzilla to do? If it's Officer Minnie Mouse versus bad guy Godzilla. And really the understanding we have to have is that the whole use of force equation is evaluated based upon the foreseeable risk of injury.
Right.
If an officer, if Godzilla kicks Minnie, right, versus Minnie kicking Godzilla, right, and depending on which one's the officer. Right? So I knew this one old, age, size, gender, relative strength, SWAT guy, specialized knowledge, skills, or abilities. Look, a lot of my officers are out there today, right now, dealing with guys that look like, crumpled paper is what they have on the side of their head for ears, right? In other words, people with lots of MMA, UFC, combatives type of training. or prior military vets where you see a tattoo,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody assumes some type of stance, whoa, right? And you're like, well, and yeah, that doesn't matter, but write it down anyway. The fact is that specialized knowledge, skills, or abilities are something we have to deal with out there.
Right.
I knew this one old SWAT guy. He was beat up crazy, used to stand in the rain with his gun, beat up. So you're in a confrontation with the suspect and you get your arm broken as an officer. Does that change what is objectively reasonable under the
Absolutely.
Yes, of course.
Absolutely.
You chase the 21-year-old and and you're not 21
Right.
anymore, and you catch him and you're like sucking air and he's going, "Okay, I'm ready."
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah. Does that change what is reasonable? Of course it does. Beat up crazy, right? Now let me make this clear. Just because somebody's mentally ill or under the influence of alcohol or drugs doesn't mean you get to saw crazy, wax same, right? It doesn't work that way. But the
Thanks,
real
J.D. Buck-Savage.
Exactly. And the Ninth Circuit, by the way, for example, has said because somebody's mentally ill, they need doctors, not jails, right? Well, we got to get them there first, right?
Right.
But what's the real issue when you're dealing with somebody who's under the influence of alcohol or drugs or mentally ill? The real issues for officers are higher level of pain tolerance, accelerated strength, and typically an inability or a failure to acknowledge and comply with verbal commands.
Right.
And officers need to make sure that they break those down, not only their assessment of the situation, but in their explanation or articulation of what they did and why it was objectively reasonable. So I knew this one old SWAT guy. He was beat up crazy, used to stand in the rain. What the heck is she talking about? Environmental factors.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if officers walk from bright light into darkness, darkness into bright light, you're dealing with somebody on stairs. Are you above or below? You're out on the side of the freeway and that slippery plant stuff that
Ice, snow.
Yeah, ice, snow, the beach, right?
Mhm.
You walk into a high school and you end up in the locker room and the floor is wet, or a grocery store, and these are all issues. And you need to explain why they were issues. Or, for example, crowd conditions at an event, or your radio traffic doesn't work. You have no communication system. So environmental factors can be very important in explaining. You only get one chance to tell your story for the first time.
Right.
And after that, you're just making shit up, making excuses, or saying what your lawyer told you. So unfortunately, when you tell your story, when you write your report, you do that IA or homicide investigative interview, you go in for a prelim, typically you're not going to have somebody like me sitting there with you reminding you to go through all these details, make sure, because later plaintiff's counsel,
Mm-hmm.
typically disguised as a criminal defense attorney, they're going to say, you didn't say that the first time you told this story, right?
Right.
And so the eighth factor in the 8 officer subject factors is proximity to potential weapons, whether it's the fireplace poker to the firearm you brought with you and everything in the kitchen sink in between. Articulating what the officer was concerned with regard to potential weapons in the area. The final thing in the equation, the 8, 3, 5 squared, the 3 is the 3 levels of force: non-deadly, intermediate, and deadly. In the Ninth Circuit and other circuits, you'll find that non-deadly force is force with a minimal risk of injury, intermediate force is force with a significant risk of injury, and deadly force is defined as force with a substantial risk of causing serious bodily injury or death. So those are the components of the force equation: the inside of the crate, the underside of the lid. It's 11 flashcards of information with a label on the bottom formed into a cube. You can actually test yourself. That self-assessment
Right.
part is just draw a square. Just draw 4 sides and fill in the outside and the inside of the box in the middle. So 4, 14th, gram, 8th, inside 8, 3, 5, 5, TOC over OR. You can put the 2 there as well if you want. For us, the Ninth Circuit has said we need to consider whether or not we gave warnings and gave the individual an opportunity to recover and comply from pain and do what the nice officer told them to do, and then whether there were any alternative options an officer could have used. That's the state of the law currently in the Ninth Circuit and throughout California, as the California Supreme Court has deemed thus far. Graham versus Connor is the standard for state law claims with regard to use of force as well. So this is a comprehensive 11 flashcards of information formed into a crate with an equation. It's simple to remember and apply.
Missy, thank you so much for all the work that you do to help defend law enforcement officers, to help teach law enforcement officers. Hopefully the impact you're having is just going to continue on and on and on for years. I really appreciate your work.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Doug Wiley, Police Magazine.